permanent social classes, they're not just accidents of history. They're actually the result of systems that were designed to maintain inequality, sometimes for centuries. So we're going to explore the architecture of that permanence to really understand how these structures are built to last. Okay, so the first thing you really have to get is that systems built to last don't rely on just brute force. I mean, think about it. Raw violence, it's expensive, it's super unstable, and all it really does is create resistance. The hierarchies that truly endure, we're talking empires, castes, even modern states, they achieve that permanence through something way more sophisticated. It's all about systemic structure and, crucially, psychological belief. So to really see how this works, we've got to go back, way back to the original blueprint. This is where this honestly brilliant psychological shift happened, the moment a person's external condition became their internal identity. So let's take ancient Egypt, for example. In the beginning, sure, power was all about force, but the system only became truly permanent when it stopped just ruling people and started organizing their entire lives. Professions, for instance, became hereditary. If you were born to a farmer, guess what? You were a farmer. The system was designed to make your social position feel like a cosmic fact, not just some temporary situation. And this right here, this is the absolute key. This is where the system makes this incredible leap from class of just a condition, something that happens to you, to class as an identity, something that is you. And once people internalize their place in that order, well, the system basically starts to run itself. You can see this principle taken to its absolute extreme in the Indian caste system. I mean, unlike a lot of modern societies that kind of deny class exists, here it was totally explicit. There was zero pretense of mobility. Your birth decided everything, your job, your social value, even your spiritual worth. And it was all framed as this sacred moral order. So to resist, that wasn't just rebellion against people. It was seen as acting against the entire universe. So as history moves forward, these tools of control, they don't just vanish. Nope, they just evolve. They become more abstract and a lot less visible. And this timeline here really shows that evolution pretty clearly. You see how we go from the direct divine authority of, say, a pharaoh, to the feudal system, where serfs were literally bound to the land just to survive. Then, boom, industrial capitalism comes along and swaps land for wage labor. And today, a big one is debt. A kind of obligation that feels totally personal, totally voluntary, right? But it actually serves a very similar function. Colonialism basically perfected this stuff on a global scale. Take the British and India, for instance. They didn't rule that massive country with soldiers alone, no way. They engineered a system. First, they trained a small local elite to manage everybody else, giving them status but never any real power. Then they restricted education for the masses. And finally, they made sure to keep the population fragmented and divided. What you get is this multi-layered system where each class is basically policing the one right below it. And that brings us right up to the Industrial Revolution. The big promise, right, was mobility, a new life. But the reality, well, it was a new kind of trap. The system didn't need physical change anymore, it just needed workers to be dependent. So yeah, you were technically free, but that freedom was kind of an illusion. Your survival depended on getting a wage, and that economic pressure, it disciplined the workforce way more effectively than any whip-cracking overseer ever could. So that's the history, but what about today? How does this whole architecture of permanence look now? Well, the walls are definitely still there. They've just become invisible. Okay, so let's talk about something we all hear all the time, that modern education is the great equalizer, the ultimate tool for social mobility. But what if it's not? What if, historically, it's actually functioned as the exact opposite? What if its main job has always been to act as a filter that sorts people into their predetermined places? Because when you really look at the structure, it's like there are two different systems running side by side. On one hand, you have elite education. Historically, that's been all about teaching authority, abstract thought, how to lead, how to negotiate. Then you have mass education. A lot of it was designed on this 19th century Prussian model, and it often emphasizes things like obedience, standardization, and just following the rules. Look, it's not about stopping people from learning, it's about training different classes to play their expected roles in the system. And then there's debt. Honestly, this might be one of the most brilliant control mechanisms ever invented. Why? Because it feels voluntary.
It even feels responsible to take on debt, right? But its function is ancient. It binds your future labor. Think about it. A person in serious debt, from student loans, a mortgage, whatever, is just less likely to take big risks, less likely to challenge the status quo, definitely less likely to start a revolution. That caution is exactly what preserves the hierarchy.
Okay, now this is super important to understand. This whole thing doesn't require some secret room of shadowy figures planning it all out. That's not how it works. The most effective systems don't need active conspirators. They become self-reproducing. So you're probably thinking, but wait, what about the people who do make it? What about all those rags to riches stories? Well, the system needs them. They are what we can call the controlled exceptions. These really visible success stories, they aren't bugs in the system, they're essential features. They're the proof that keeps the belief in fairness alive, and that makes everyone else who doesn't make it feel like their position is somehow their own fault.
You know, this also explains why so many revolutions just fail to create real lasting change. They're great at attacking the visible power holders, the kings, the aristocrats, the party bosses. But what they often do is leave the underlying mechanisms of power, the structure of education, the flow of capital, the system of debt, completely intact. And what happens then? Well, new elites just rise up to take the place of the old ones.
And all of this leads to a final, really crucial point. The most stable systems, they aren't cruel. They're efficient. They just quietly reproduce advantage, generation after generation. See, they don't build these giant walls with signs that say, you can't pass. It's not that obvious. They just operate on probability. They don't outright prevent you from moving up. They just make it incredibly statistically unlikely. They don't destroy your potential. They just delay it year after year until maybe it just expires. And I guess that's the real takeaway here. Once you understand the deep history of how these mechanisms work, the chaos, the inequalities of our world today, they stop feeling so random. They stop feeling so confusing. Instead, they start to feel familiar. Very, very familiar.